And I see Mike, you wanted to say something, so I want to turn it over to you there as well.
Well, I was really nodding my head in agreement. I can share a little bit of perspective. And as a child, as a young man, I spent a lot of time in the South, and of course, I was born and raised and was educated here in the North. But from the age of 2 through really high school, I spent a great deal of time with my grandparents in a little small town in Mississippi, and that experience was interesting from the standpoint that it was definitely a different culture scenario. You know, here in Chicago, with Chicago being much more fast paced, was blessed enough to grow up in what you would consider a community, but it was different than being in the South. In the South, it was much more family oriented. As far as men were concerned, men were the head of the household, so to speak. And to Tony's point, there was even here locally in the South, again, elders were held at, a certain extent. That's why I always make reference to my grandfather and a lot of the men of his age. And that helped set an example example for me that when I, came back here to Chicago or whatever, I carried myself and I saw myself carrying myself a little bit differently than my friends that had not been exposed, to that experience of being in the South. Even though, like I said, it was a little small town and, there was segregation at one point, but it had evolved away from that where, again, it wasn't about being black or white. In small communities, it tends to eventually evolve into, it was more like a village, to be real honest with you. So whether you're black, you're a white, you have limited resources, you have limited, distractions. So the things that people did was much more like a community. And it was very, like I say, very, very family based, very, two-parent household type scenario. And I do think that had a lot to do with kind of shaping my thought process and my mindset, that even being back north in Chicago and some of the things that you experienced, back then, it made a difference, to be really honest with you. And I would have conversations with a lot of my friends and share some of the things or some of the experience that I would have, in the South, so to speak. And it was almost like it was foreign to them because they had never really experienced that. I mean, to the point where, I had a couple of friends that actually came down and spent a couple of weeks during the summer, just to experience that. So I do think that there is a significant difference in even here locally in the States into, the things that you are exposed to, especially, culturally that way.
I thought Tony's comments were just profound. I agree with you, Jamal, that I was just processing what Tony was sharing and thinking about how that affected my worldview on our race, my culture as well. And I would say that certainly globally that there's one perspective in terms of the Black experience and specifically Black men, which is our talk. But as a Black man growing up in the U.S., having been born and raised in South Carolina, I have a very unique experience that I certainly can't deny. And I've carried an awareness of that, even that the notion of the world and how the world sees me through a particular set of lenses before I even speak. And I knew even as a young academic, when I was a professor and as a dean, as a vice president, as a president, I knew that when I would walk into a room that folks would have an instant impression and they would have formulated an opinion as to who I am. And that did shape how I navigated leadership and I would say the worldview on Black men. It shaped how I navigated fatherhood. It shaped how I navigated friendships. There's both pride and there's pressure in that, as I see it. trying to be excellent, not just for myself, but because I know that I'm representing something much bigger than me. And I think that for any man growing up in the United States as a Black man, we do have a lot to carry, because there have been folks who have truly laid down their lives for us to be able to do what we've been able to accomplish. And I knew I didn't accomplish anything in my own strength, but that there are folks who laid a pathway for me to follow. And I had to own up to that. I had to acknowledge it. I had to respect that. And I carried that with me throughout my matriculation in school. And I carried it throughout my trajectory in higher education as a leader over 28 years.
Don?
Yeah, well, I'm, the whole notion of being a Black man in America is just freighted with such weight. And it seems that we, I often say to friends and family that it seems like we wake up every day with this cloud. And it also seems that we spend, particularly in those kind of spaces that Larry, you were talking about, we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to make sure other folks aren't uncomfortable. And, how crazy is that? It gets exhausting. It gets exhausting. But I think going back to an earlier comment about culture, so much of it has to begin in the home. And again, that's where we have a challenge. So I'm here. I'm here.
Let me say a couple of things. First of all, I want people to understand that the perspective that Tony talked about, the international perspective, he wouldn't say this himself, but I will say this. He gained that experience as a philanthropist, someone who identified the importance for his son to see him go to a foreign country with people that look like us and to do very significant things to improve the quality of life in those communities for those people. As a consequence, TJ, his son, is just graduating from college and has ambitions that are international, and that, in fact, he's going to be headed to Europe, I think, in a month or less. He's not afraid of the world stage. He's not, so that taught him, even while they were humbly providing water, providing clothing, providing the kinds of things that folks needed, but at the same time listening, not coming over there as a savior, not coming over there as someone who was coming to fix everything. He went humbly, set that example for his son, set that example for the community, for the village, so that they could see that whatever they're hearing or reading about Black people, Black men in America, here was one who was here that, who really came to help. And that's all. He had no agenda. He came to help. And in that process, learned a great deal himself, as you can see. I think it's important for people to have that context, because, we have to start thinking on average in a much more global way about our potential impact. This topic, Jamal, is one that I'm sure we will be revisiting in some form or another over the course of all of these conversations, because it really gets to the essence of, the struggle that we have as men that frames so much of our interaction with each other, with our sons, with our grandchildren. And it, like Don said, it's put upon us. It's not something that, that for the most part we have gone out to seek, or that because of something we have done or not done. It's just there. And it's always been there. And then sometimes it's been a lot worse than others. And it seems that we're in our period now where it's pretty bad. So, culture is a very fluid kind of thing, which I think is made clear by when Mike's comments about being in the South and people in the North who are Black not being able to really relate to what he's talking about because of the way he was raised. It's a very fluid kind of thing. The sad part is that the cultures, the practices, the interactions that make us who we are should really be celebrated. I don't care if you're Italian, if you're Norwegian, those cultures should be celebrated. Asian, all the foods that I love, that were not natural to me. If we could move away from all this, kind of judgment and fear and craziness, and just celebrate the differences in these cultures, that would go a long way toward allowing Black men to be seen for who we really are and be judged on the basis of what we do and how we show up, as opposed to what you've heard about us or what you read about us, or, it's just really sad to me. But it's real. And I think that to the extent that we are having these intergenerational conversations, it varies from generation to generation and to a great extent, because in some senses it's getting better. And, but by the same token, what would appear to be improvements for younger people who don't really seem to be as hung up on these cultural differences and how they might impact their chance for advancement in business or in society. Sometimes they reach a certain level and they realize that what they thought was kind of passé ain't so much, and it's very real. So we have got to find better ways, I think, to communicate, particularly intergenerationally, about the importance of culture, just for ourselves. I mean, our families, the disintegration of our own family structure has a lot to do with the challenges that we face as a people, as a country. We've got to do better. We've got to find ways to do better. And I'm hoping these conversations can help us, because there is a lot of wisdom that we have that we can share. But it has to be done in the context of, at least in my mind, of appreciating where younger people are coming from because of their experiences and how they view this. And there has to be some middle ground where we can meet and have conversations and figure out how we can advance the community based on shared understanding, shared appreciation, and a shared desire to see us thrive as opposed to survive.
Dwayne, I just wanted to comment on what you just said. I think two things popped in my head as you were speaking, and I appreciate all of what you said. If we were to get in our vehicles and drive down, let's just say we drove up I-75 and we're up, an hour outside of Atlanta, and then we pulled over, we went to our GPS and we put home and start route. If we don't have an address in there, we're never going to get to home. It's physically impossible. So the rhetorical question for all of us and any of those people watching or listening is, can we truly get home if we've never been there? Right? And I'm going to expound on that by saying the first time we went to Africa in 2017, we sat in a village, 28 women, with 28 homes they call mañatas or bomas. And we sat there with women who run the village and the children, and the husbands live in a different village, right? But the women's job is to create the home. They build the homes, not the men. The men is their job is to go out to be leaders, to go out and find food. At the end of that first village, sitting with the ladies, my wife was in tears, of course, just listening to them. And they look like all of my ancestors. They look like my grandmother. They look like my older aunts. And they don't speak English, they speak Ma, which is their native tongue. They don't even speak Swahili. So our guides, which became our friends, especially a young guy named Moses, when he was translating, the ladies asked us, and this is very profound. They said, it was more of a statement that they were wondering what people, Black people who left Africa, do they remember them? Are they going to come back home to where they came from? Do they even remember that there are people left there after people were taken to the US and the Caribbean? And I never thought about that. So when there's a group of people left at home, so to speak, who are asking if the people who were taken from them or the people who left by choice are ever going to get back home. So as I go back to that analogy with the GPS in the vehicle, most Black men and Black women in America don't know where home is. They have a general direction. It's east of here, right? But that's all they know. And I remember that village and that guide, Moses told us, in 7 years of being a guide, he's never seen Black tourists. Not one time that stayed at that lodge. Not one time. This village had never seen Black tourists. Not one time. That says a lot. In a country where, as Black men and Black women, we flaunt our resources. We drive down the street showing our resources. We live in a building that shows our massive resources. We wear designer names on our clothes and shoes and handbags to show our vast resources. But we can't find our way back home. So how can we truly be the men who we were created to be if we don't even understand where we came from? So what we know is if we can trace back to when our ancestors came to America, we understand what life was like since then. Slavery, Jim Crow, we understand that. That's a fraction of our history. So if we were to figure out who we were to be as men, we can't stop there. We can't stop 100 years ago and consider that our history. Our history goes way beyond that. So how can we become the men we're supposed to be if we only have half the picture? And the picture that we have started out with oppression, started out with our ancestors being thrown overboard, right? Carolina is one of the entry points. I believe more slaves came into the Carolinas, I believe, right there at that port than any other place in history. And as you look off that pier, which I've been to, and Larry probably knows, they built a museum there at that pier, at that port. You look in that water and you realize that they tossed the slaves, the ones who finally made it to America but dead in those cargo ships. Those bodies are still there. The souls are still there. So if we are looking at ourselves as Black men and trying to figure out who we are, our history can't start at the port of South Carolina. It can't start on the slave trade from Africa to the Caribbean. It can't start there. It has to start with who we were before our ancestors got there. And I would challenge all of us to believe that if we knew our true history, which is not slavery, which is not being minorities, it's being kings and queens on the largest continent in the world. with massive amounts of rare earth, massive amounts of rare minerals, massive amounts of everything that the world is looking for, right? Still trying to take that stuff from Africa. But if we look at who we are, we're not minorities. We're not former slaves. We are kings and queens. So if we start with that, would we treat ourselves better in the US? Would we dress better? Would we greet each other when we walk down the street instead of looking the other way because we don't want to identify with other Black people because we may seem racist? So I guess the thing that I would say is we got a long history, but we're trying to figure out who we are by looking at half of it. So that's all. No more preaching today.
Go ahead, Doctor. Amen. Amen.
But you know, so the struggle, because the dominant culture here, their whole objective is to suppress. And that's rooted in their fear. I mean, they don't want us to know. And so all the systems that are developed around American society and American culture are designed to suppress and subvert and ignore not only Black culture, but Asian culture, all other cultures. And my own personal philosophy is because, you know, they understand the dynamic of the dominant and recessive gene and, you know, what happens.
Right.
What, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Extinction.
you know, so yes, that absolutely, that knowledge and that knowledge of self and that history and understanding history and understanding the arc of history is critical. But on the other hand, there's this fight. You know, there's a fight against the TV commercials and the YouTube commercials and the, you know, I mean, so there's this constant tension, and you know, it's a job. It's a job.
Home cooked food is always better than microwave food. And what you're speaking to, Don, is everybody wants to just throw something and prepare it in a few seconds. But if you take the time and you put the right ingredients in, and Dwayne is a former restaurant owner, you let that thing simmer and marinate over a night or 2 nights or 3 nights, the outcome is always going to be better. So you're absolutely correct. How do we get our young people to understand that you're not meant to be a millionaire before you're 25? That's not the way it works. You don't have to have life figured out by the time you're 30. That's not the way it works.
Right.
But you're absolutely correct. And it's our responsibility. I think part of what we were talking about at the very beginning, it's our responsibility not to preach, but just to make people aware. The Jewish community, they have a fund. I believe they still have it. They had a fund where when students or young people got to a certain age, they sponsored and paid for them to go to Israel because they wanted them to see what it's like to be a true Israeli, right? They wanted them to see that. Why don't we do the same?
Yeah, what a worthy thing. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, and I want to highlight when we talk about culture. Interestingly, so one of the things I was going to ask next was, you know, how has this moment challenged or expanded your understanding of masculinity? And when y'all speak about, I hear that generational gap conversation again, and which is necessary. And one of the things that's important as we go into, and I know we're running on time, but it's very important when we talk about getting to that ancestral place or getting to the grandfather or getting to that past place. You have to be familiar with the father. You know, it's a connection issue, and that's kind of one of the things we talk about initially is that connection with the father connects you to his father. But when we have a disconnect, with the father, it can create a resentment. And resentment has a tendency to make you reject anything that seems to be familiar or close. Like, oh, hold up, I don't want to be anything like that, so let me turn it this way. And I know that this is, as we get to this ending point, that's a much bigger discussion I think of as you open it up even more and just kind of stretch it and expand it. Because as we talk about connection to that generation, we talk about culture. When you separate from a culture because of resentment or for lack of familiarity, you tend to create your own culture. And typically, when we have two cultures in one, those two cultures tend to battle. They tend to battle and they fight each other. And that's kind of some of the things that can be happening in this day and age. The older generation, the younger generation are battling for supremacy in some ways. One is trying to teach and one is trying to lead.
Hmm.
And it's not to say right or wrong. It's an old theory called Chesterton's fence theory that states when a fence is present, before you remove the fence, you must understand why it's there in the first place. And if you don't understand why the fence is there, you shouldn't remove it. So when you remove something, you should understand why you remove it. Instead of saying, hey, that's an old fence. It has no business here. It may be the very thing protecting you from the wolves. And then you remove the fence and you have an influx of wolves without any defense against them. And so I just wanna share that and turn it back over to Dwayne, as we wrap up and into this
Well,
issue
thank
of
you, Jamal.
culture.
We got all these A-type personalities on here. Major, I hope you got to as many as at least most of the stuff that you wanted to get to today. But I tell you, I think the next time we're going to have to block out about an hour and a half, 2 hours, because I feel like we're just getting warmed up here. But this has been very enlightening for me, because even though I know these guys, I mean, you never know all parts of anybody's life. And I think that the kinds of things that they are thinking about are deep. They are born of experience. They are worthy of being heard and contemplated. And I'm really hoping that, we can have, in the future, we may have different people, or people will have some younger people will have that. But I'm hoping we can get this group together on most of these calls, because I think what I realize is that this is really creating a bonding opportunity. I mean, it's, even though I've known them a long time, it can take relationships to another level, because the more you understand the kinds of thoughts that are in someone's head, even when you're not interacting with them, the better you get to know them, the better you appreciate them. And these ideas that are coming out of this, like developing a fund. I've been thinking about a Saturday school kind of thing, and more than thinking about it, I'm planning to try to help develop a Saturday school environment through my work that will provide us an opportunity to really blend an educational model with experiential learning, with cultural appreciation and interaction, with a better understanding about history and how it impacts what we do and how we do it. I mean, those things, we can't rely on people just coming to that somehow. There is no place where we can. There may be places where we can actually go and get it, but I don't know where that is. It's kind of catch as catch can. And I think if the more we can institutionalize the process of undertaking this kind of knowledge or learning, that the better off we will be as a people. Because right now it's just kind of all over the place. And I think we have the tools available to us with technology to really no matter what remote part of the country or world you may be in, to interact and to make things happen. So I think this was a great kickoff for the Barbershop Chronicles, and I really look forward to more discussions that can further enhance the bonding experience, and that can provide knowledge that really may be helpful or inspirational even to people who are able to listen to this. So I would encourage the people on the, once we get this thing edited and ready to go, I would encourage people on the call to really make sure we push this out and promote this so that we can really get people to pay attention and be inspired to have their own conversations. So thank you all, guys, and thank you very much, Jamal, for your help.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we'll be, do we have time for closing comments? Anybody want to have parting comments? That's not in the script, but so what?
Legacy is planting a garden that you don't get to see grow. I'll close with that.
Ooh, okay. Thank you all, and we hope you'll see us next time for Barbershop Chronicles.